Dead Space 2 sees the return of everyone's favourite alien mutilating space engineer Isaac Clarke, back where he's most effective, behind the nearest plasma cutter. Atmosphere. Of all the things that haven't changed between the previous game and this one, I'd say the atmosphere has taken the biggest hit. There was something intensely creepy about the Ishimura in Dead Space 1 that isn't replicated here until the chapter where you literally return to the Ishimura. That quiet, desolated location was where the series was at its best. The game does try though and mixes the same cold metallic settings with the same rancid decay and gory bloody halls that you saw in the first game. Its use of lighting and colour is excellent. It creates these dark, murky environments throughout the first half of the game. In certain sections it raises the tension and introduces enemies that hide behind boxes and leap out and strike you, making guttural screams as they charge at you, and in those brief moments as you wait for them to start running, you can see what the atmosphere could have been if it wasn't constantly interrupted by enemies or communications from NPCs. The occasions where you're lulled into a false sense of security are over too quickly. As time progresses, the enemy encounters increase and the atmosphere dies down and you spend more and more time in combat. Ultimately though, the atmosphere isn't where the game shines. No Harry Masons. Scares. The enemies in this game are terrifying, some of the most horrifically designed enemies in any game I've ever played. There's nothing like turning a corner and walking into something so clearly organic yet so mangled and vile that shooting it seems like a merciful act. The new additions in this game are disturbing as all hell, especially the yellow exploding children and those alien-like toddlers that produce an ungodly scream. The act of dismembering these abominations to kill them faster is a Dead Space tradition, to the point where it conditions the player to chop them up quickly and effectively, and then moves on to the next enemy. So when one falls down and stops moving, the player assumes it's dead and moves on. But that's not always the case, as randomly an enemy will prove it's not dead by trying to disembowel you once your back's turned, and these are some of the best features in the game. The enemies constantly catch you by surprise by jumping out of the shadows or making you think it's dead. Along with all the environmental hazards, sudden, gory deaths that can befall Isaac Clarke at any moment, Dead Space 2's Gore gets caught up in it being scary. The game makes you jump a few times and sometimes the tension builds up, but it's mostly just lost in the combat. So that's still no Harry Masons. Sound design. The orchestral soundtrack builds excellent tension and ramps up some more of the action-orientated sections, but it's the sound effects that steal the show. They're fantastic, with each enemy having its own harrowing scream and pained groans as you cut it to pieces with realistic sounding biological slurps and slices. The Ripper especially sounds exactly how you'd think a chainsaw being cut through a pound of flesh and then forced up against a metal wall would sound. It's a screech of metal on metal and everything in between getting eviscerated. On a side note, I especially like the sound of being in a vacuum where everything's muffled. It turns out in space, you can hear the screams. That's one Harry Mason. Gore. Dead Space's Gore is where its main shocks are. Again, the horrifically designed enemies are an eyesore and yet a treat, with each one being a horror of its own. Dead bodies ripped to pieces and mutated monstrosities litter the halls. Biological matter and blood plaster the walls. Everything is disgusting or disturbing. Tentacles, yellow infected flesh, monsters that vomit acid around each corner, and with each one being more messed up than the last. Forcing the player to chop them all to pieces as well pushes it over the edge, being as spiteful of these creatures as they are to you. And then there's the eye drill. It's gnarly and gory as all hell. That's two Harry Masons. Story. Isaac Clarke awakens after being tested on for a few years and discovers he can't remember much of the time in between his last adventure and the necromorph outbreak on the game's new setting, the Sprawl. He sets off to destroy the new alien artifact marker he apparently helped build that he doesn't remember, with the help of people he doesn't trust at all while trying to make sense of the jumbled messages in his head. The story is alright, but my favourite part's where he confronts a hallucination of his ex-girlfriend who died in the previous game, making the final score 3 out of 5 Harry Masons. You can see how the series leaned more towards action as time went on, but Dead Space 2 still has its fair share of surprises and shocks, but it never quite lives up to the heights of the first game. Again, I'd like to remind you this whole thing is down to my opinion of horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool. I'd get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I was certainly caught off guard by supposedly dead necromorphs, I did not scream like a banshee or run away from the computer, and I advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.